All right, so we'll say let's begin.
Is the daf being given in the morning and then Shalosh just a seam, or Shalosh is doing the daf?
Stay tuned for the email today. Keep you on your toes. And I'll be in code. You'll have to use your Daf Yomi decoder ring to
broadcasting system.
That's right. We have an emergency channel. All right, so we'll say good morning. Let's begin. Today's daf is daf Chaf Aleph. We are going to begin on Chaf Amud Beis. So remember again, we left off a little bit up. We left off Minayim LeKohen Gadol. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom. So the Gemara says, Minayim LeKohen Gadol shemeis v'lo achar tachtov shetehei minchaso kreva mishal yarshim. How do we know that in the event that the Kohen Gadol died, and let's say they did not go ahead and appoint a new Kohen Gadol in his stead yet, meaning let's say, or whatever the Metzias is, let's say you'd have a reason where for some reason there was not a standing Kohen Gadol. So we'll say, so we know that the Kohen Gadol's special mincha offering still had to be offered. So the Gemara suggests now, how do we know that we would take the funds, we would get the funds for that carbon from the Yarshim, from the inheritors of the Kohen Gadol? Talmud Lomar mi banav ye'aseh asa. So the Torah says that ultimately from his children you will do it. So the Gemara says, Yachol yivi'enu lechatzayim. So we'll say, as you pointed out yesterday, if you remember, the Kohen Gadol's mincha was split up into two parts. And remember, we saw the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon and Lakish in terms of how you sanctify it. Do you sanctify it all at once in the morning and then divide it up into two parts, or do you sanctify as needed? But everyone agreed that at the end of the day you would offer it up in two parts, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. So now the Gemara says you might have thought that you would do the same thing even in the absence of the Kohen Gadol. Talmud Lomar Osa Kula Amarti Di Rabbi Yehuda. So also therefore the Torah says you will offer it. The only time you split it up is when there's an acting Kohen Gadol. But if there's no acting Kohen Gadol, you offer it all up at once. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Eino ba'a ela mishal tzibur. Rabbi Shimon says, no. Going back to the original point, if there's no Kohen Gadol, we don't get the funds for this special mincha from his yarshim, from his inheritors. Rather, it comes from communal funds. Shne'emar chak olam, because the Torah says ultimately, Torah uses the phrase chak olam. We translate that as an everlasting statute. But interestingly enough, we'll see the way the Gemara understands it. Chak olam mimi shabris krusa lo. The chak olam comes literally from the one whose covenant is eternal. Now, I'll say, take a look at the Karban Ha'edah. So the Karban Ha'edah is on the right-hand side of the page, towards the end of the Karban Ha'edah, the last couple of lines. Mimi shahabris shalo, mimi shahaolam shalo. V'kasal kadaytcha dahainu mitrumas halishka. Shekvar hikdish hatzibor l'shamayim. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the way the Gemara is understanding it is the following. The Torah says chak olam, it'll be an everlasting statute. So the Gemara is saying that the money for the carbon comes from that which is eternal. What is that which is eternal? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what does that mean? The money comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The money comes from monies that were pledged to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which refers again to the communal funds of Trumas HaLishka. Okay. So the Gemara goes back. The Gemara says Kalil Taktar. So the Gemara says you shall go ahead and literally Kalil Taktar means that you'll offer it up and it'll be totally burnt. So the Gemara says Kalil Lahaktorah. We learn from here that the entirety of this offering is burnt. Look at the Karban Ha'edah again. Kalil Lahaktorah Shelo Yasu Mimenu Shiraim La'achila. The Torah says, as opposed to other types of menachos, where there is, we know, for example, by the classic mincha, only a kamitza is offered up and the rest is consumed. When it comes to the mincha of the Kohen Gadol, there is no shirayim. There's nothing left over. There's nothing to be consumed. Everything is burnt. Fine. Kohen Gadol shemes. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Ba bar Mamol boi. He asked the following kasha: Michlefa shitasi de Reb Shimon. It would appear that the position of Reb Shimon is switched around. Why? Taman amar mishal yarshim, v'hacha amar mishal tzibor. So we'll say, interestingly enough, in our Mishnah, so we'll say this is again the case of the Kohen Gadol, and there's not a case of the Kohen Gadol who died. There is not yet another appointed Kohen Gadol. The Kohanic mincha, the Kohen Gadol mincha has to be offered, and the shaila is what? Who picks up the bill? So the Gemara says, since we have Rabbi Shimon contradicting himself. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon says the money comes from the heirs of the deceased Kohen Gadol. And yet later on it says, excuse me, in another mission it says that it comes from the Yarshin, and here it says it comes from the Tzibor. Amr B'chia Bar Ba top of Chaf Aleph below Yeos Umaksha. This is a good kasha. Asa Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha Rabbi Yavo B'Shem Rabbi Yochanan Devar Torah Hu Shehu Ba Shetehei Ba Min HaTzibor. So the Gemara answers, really the halacha is that midda oraisa, it should come from communal funds. It should come from communal funds. So the Gemara says, we will say skip the parentheses and go to the words after the parentheses. Hayisi Omer Yigvula. So I might have thought that halacha lamaisa they should collect it from there. So I see the will say what that means is I might have thought that once it's coming from communal funds, they should do a special collection for it. Meaning, we'll say go back to what we just said before. Now that we're using the drush of Chak Olam teaches us that it has to come from communal funds. So I might have thought that what does communal funds mean? We should do a special appeal for the mincha of the Kohen Gadol. Let's do a special appeal. So the Gemara says, no. Ha'isi Omer Yigvula. His skinu, skip to parentheses again, his skinu shetehei ba'a mitrumas halishka. The rabbis instituted that we do not need to do a special appeal, but rather again we take these monies from the general fund. Rabbi Yosa Rabbi Yochanan, boy, mahu shlema b'shachres u'shlema ben arba'im, o shlema b'shachres u'betela ben arba'im. So we'll say now, here's what we know. We know that beforehand we said that although when the Kohen Gadol himself offers this mincha offering, he splits it up, and he does half in the morning, half in the afternoon. Now, what happens when we're offering it up in his absence? So do we offer it now? We just said before that we don't split it up. So what does that mean? Does that mean that we just offer it all up in the morning and nothing's done in the afternoon? Or does it mean that we offer a whole one in the morning and a whole one in the afternoon? So the Gemara says, Kate pshitale dichsiv minchas tomid. So we'll say the Gemara says, well, it would appear to me that the answer to that is quite simple, because the Torah itself says it should be a minchas tomid, which means I will say now tomid over here means morning and evening, and therefore it would appear that in the absence of the Kohen Gadol, we in fact bring a whole mincha both in the morning as well as in the evening. Okay, shloshes lugin mahim. So on one hand, what else do we do about the shloshes lugin? Now, we'll say, remember, there are 3 lugin of oil that are brought along with the mincha of the Kohen Gadol. So we'll say now we're just trying to figure out the mechanics of it. How is it brought? So when you talk about these 3 lugin, mahim, shloshes lugin shachrish, or shloshes lugin ben arba'im, do we bring 3 lug in the morning and 3 lug in the afternoon? O lug umechza shachris, ulug umechza ben arba'im, or do we bring 1.5 lugin in the morning and 1.5 lugin in the afternoon? Amar Chizkiya, uf hada tzrichalei. So the Gemara says we must. So literally, uf hada tzrichalei means this is also a good kasha, right? Uf hada tzrichalei. This is also meaning now that you're asking this, let me bring in another question. What's the other question? Shnei kumtzin mahin. Now we'll say along with the Kohen Gadol's mincha, there's also kamitzin, right? There are also these handfuls of called handfuls of levona. So what do you do about the kamitzin of levona? So the Gemara says shnei kumtzin b'shachris u'shnei kumtzin bein ha'arbayim. Do you go ahead and bring 2 kamitzos in the morning and 2 kamitzos in the afternoon? O kometz achas shachris v'kometz achas bein ha'arbayim. Or do you simply bring 1 kometz in the morning and 1 kometz in the afternoon? Amar Rav Yosa, klum lamdu lekometz lo b'minchas chote. Have we not learned out the concept of kometz from the mincha, from the sinner's mincha? Remember, we've spoken about this earlier, that there is a circumstance in which a person who normally would be liable to a chatos will bring a mincha. In cases of poverty, where a person can't afford a regular animal for a chatos, they can bring a korban mincha. So I'll say, so that becomes the paradigm for minachos. Ma lahalon shnei kumsin, afkan shnei kumsin. Just like over there, we bring 2 kamitos with every offering. So to over here, we'll bring 2 kamitos as well. Skip the parentheses. I'm sorry, don't skip the parentheses. Ma taman tzrichalei, afacha tzrichalei. Just like over there, it's a good kasha. So to over here, it's a good kasha. Amr Chizkiya, klum lomdu shloshes lugin lomi tamid shel bein ha'arbayim. Have we not learned out the 3 lug from tamid shel bein ha'arbayim? Ma lahalon shloshes lugin. Just like over there, you require 3 lugin by every offering. Afkan shloshes lugin. So to over here, there are 3 lugin. Umat taman tzrichalei, afkan tzrichalei. And just like over there, it was a kasha. Here too, it was a kasha. So I will say, what seems to come out from this sugya is that halacha l'maisa, number 1, This is all in the absence of the Kohen Gadol. In the absence of the Kohen Gadol, we will offer a complete Asir Sa'ifa in the morning and a complete Mincha in the afternoon. In the absence of the Kohen Gadol, we will go ahead and do 1.5 lugin of oil in the morning, 1.5 lugin of oil in the afternoon. When it comes to the kamitzos, it would appear that we'll do 2 kamitzos with each carbon mincha. Okay? So it says the Gemara. Shelo yihiyah. Shelo yihiyah. So we'll say, if you remember again, one of the enactments that the Mishnah spoke about was that the ashes of the para aduma will not be subject to me'ilah. If you remember again, the Lasson over there was va'ala para shelo yiyu mo'alin be'afra. That I will say, actually, let me rephrase that. The way the Mishnah reads is that when it comes to the para aduma, that people should not commit me'ilah with its ashes. Now, obviously, what does that mean? So the Gemara says, Shimmy ben Nachman, Rishim Rabbi Yonasan. Bedinhu, meaning logically, bedinhu, sheyima'alu bahen. So we'll say, it would have appeared logical that the ashes of the para aduma would go ahead and be subject to me'ilah. Take a look at the Kavanah Ida for just a moment. The Kavanah Ida says, Bedin hu she'im ma'alu be'efer para, ela she'tnai bezin hu she'in mo'alim ba'afra. So we'll say, logically, we would have said that the ashes of the para aduma are in fact subject to the prohibition of me'ilah. Remember, me'ilah just means inappropriate use of consecrated property. So the ashes of para aduma should be no different than any other sacrificial item that is subject to the laws of me'ilah. Ve'hein gazru shelo yima'alu ba. But the rabbis went ahead and made a t'nai. We'll say now again, remember, when it comes to certain consecrated items, the rabbis have the right to regulate the levels of consecration. So the rabbis made a t'nai, essentially a condition, that the ashes themselves of para aduma are not consecrated. Okay? So Gemara says, well, one second. V'hatani chatos, but the Torah uses the lashon of chatos by para aduma. And whenever the Torah uses the lashon of chatos, we learn from that, melamid shemo'alin ba, we learn that you go ahead and it is subject to me'ilah, because we'll say again, essentially what chatos says is that this is a sacrificial item. Once it's a sacrificial item, it is subject to all the laws of me'ilah, to which the Gemara says, I'll tell you how to darshan that. Ba mo'alin, no, what it means is the para itself is subject to the laws of me'ilah, ve'in mo'alin ba'afra, but its ashes are not subject to me'ilah. So the question, of course, is what's happening over here? So listen to this. Am Rabbi Avrohom, barishona hayu mishtak shikin ba. In the beginning, they were mishtash kishin ba. Now, what does that mean? Take again a look at the Karban Ha'ida. I don't want to play favorites, Tiklin Chanatins or the Karban Ha'ida, but I've taken an affinity to the Karban Ha'ida. Also, because he's just much easier, because he's right by the Gemara. Right? If you notice that, meaning he's right by the side, as opposed to the Tiklin Chanatin, which is always on a different part of the page, he's right here. So I'm not weighing in on this, but I'm just saying. Look at the Karban Ha'ida. So take a look over here. He says, Mishtak shikin. You see in the Karban Ha'ida, he says Mishtak kishin ba ba'afra hayu misrapin v'nosnin osa agabe mako sehen de efer merape mako. So also it's very interesting. So what used to happen? People would take the ashes of the para aduma and they would use it to go ahead and use it like as a dressing for wounds. Apparently, again, it had some type of medicinal purposes as well. So people were using the ashes. They both say, obviously, this is secondary ashes, because the real ashes of the para aduma, of course, are used for the para aduma, and those were a very significant commodity. This must have been some leftover ash from something else involved with the para aduma. So people would go ahead and use it for medicinal purposes. So what happens? saying the gazru she'ima'aluba. So what happens? The rabbi stepped in, and the rabbi said that, they didn't like this, because again, remember, the concern over here is what? That if they're using this now, what's going to happen? They may end up actively using other parts of the paraduma as well for inappropriate purposes, and therefore the rabbis were gozer that you can't do it, because if you do it, you're going to be in violation of me'ilah, of inappropriate use of consecrated property. Of course, again, remember the structure over here. Mida oraisa, can you use the ashes of paraduma? Mida oraisa? Yes. Why? Because the laws of me'ilah only apply to the para itself and not to the ashes. Now the Gemara is saying the rabbis were goes that it is such a me'ilah. Now the Gemara is explaining why. In the beginning, people used to use the ashes for their own personal reasons. Again, which Rabbi technically is fine. When it became so widespread, Chazal became concerned that people may end up using other parts of the para. So what happens? They made a takana This is very interesting. Kevan shegazru excuse me. V'gazru shimaluba. Kevan shenigzru. I'm sorry. V'gazru shimaluba. Kevan shenigzru gazru shelo yimaluba. I will say literally translated what this means is, and then once they were goes there that there should be no me'ilah. Now what does that mean? Look at the carbon ha'ida again. Kevan shegazru. Kevan shenigzru. Upershu misafek hazos and nitmu besafek tumas hames lo hayu mazin alav shlo yima'aluba. So it says very interesting. So now what ended up happening was two things. So two ways you could read this Gemara. Number one, the way you could read this Gemara is that their gezerah worked. People stopped using the ash, and therefore the rabbis took their gezerah off. Meaning the gezerah was there to make people treat the pardim with greater sanctity. It worked. So there was no need to keep it on the books if it worked. The Carbon Ha'ida says something different. The Carbon Ha'ida says what ended up happening. Once they made the Paraduma subject to Me'ilah, then people stopped using Para Aduma. Now what does Rabbi say? If you think about this for just a moment, if you go ahead, a Paraduma is sanctified. So let's say now a person is not sure, did I come in contact with Tuma, did I not come in contact with Tuma? So we normally say, okay, just be sprinkled by the action of the Paraduma out of Safek. Here's the problem. If the para aduma is subject to the laws of me'ilah, if you are not tameh and you get sprinkled by the ashes, then what? You have engaged in an act of me'ilah. So what ended up happening, says the Carbon Ha'ida, people essentially were in a state of safek tuma, did nothing to rectify their circumstances. So it's such a fascinating idea. So on one hand, Chazal's desire to go ahead and rectify people's inappropriate use of the ash, or what they felt to be potential inappropriate use of the ash, actually had another negative unintended consequence, that people stopped using the para aduma altogether. So what ended up happening? So Chazal felt they had to repeal their takana, because the truth is, even if people end up using the ash, remember, that's not real me'ilah. So we don't want people using the ash, but so better to have people potentially do something that we don't like so much, but is not halachically problematic, than to go ahead and make a gzera that's going to prevent people from using the para altogether. That's why the Mishnah says they originally said that Lamaisa will be subject to me'ilah, and then they repealed the rabbinic me'ilah prohibition to put it back to where it was, and therefore encouraged people to do para aduma properly. So Gemara goes back to Valakinin. So we'll see if you remember again. The Mishnah spoke about the idea, actually machlokas, of what happens in the bird offerings. Let's say it turns out that, remember, one of the offerings was invalid. So the shaila is now they had to replace it, because remember again, somebody contributed money towards a proper bird carbon. So what do you do in the event that the carbon itself is invalid? So we had a machlokas in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi says, Tanakama said that it comes from Mishal Tzibor. Communal funds replace the puzzle bird. And Rabbi Yossi says, who does it come from? It comes from the bird supplier. It comes from the guy who ultimately had the bird contract with the Beis Midrash. He agreed to go ahead and make up for any losses. So says the Gemara Ba'alakinin. So also we actually had this Gemara 2 days ago. Ha'isha hazos b'mahi miskapes. So if you remember again this case, this was the case of the money that was found merza al merza between the kinin and the olos, between the chatas bird offerings and between the ola bird offerings. So what did we do if it's mechza mechza? Remember, where does it go? Mechza mechza between the kinin and the olos? Olos. Good. It goes to the olos. Why? Shkoyach. Right. You could have texted that into me. You could so it goes to the olos. It goes to the olos. Why? Because the olos are more chamer. Because remember again, the olos ultimately are totally consumed on the mizbeach. Remember the Gemara there asked, that's very nice, but what do you do about the fact? Now remember, I will say we don't know. That doesn't tell us that the money is actually from the olos pot. All it tells us is that we have a doubt, and when we have a doubt, especially when it comes to biblical items, we resolve it stringently. That's all it tells us. But what happens if the money was originally from what? Was really from the chatos. Meaning, let's say again, a woman was there that day, she had a baby, or she was a zava, and she had to bring the chatos bird offering, and she put money in there, and now her carbon is not going to be offered. Someone says, what do you do about that? So that's the Gemara saying over here. Ha'isha hazos, this woman, meaning let's say we have to entertain the possibility that the money found mechza does in fact belong to the chatos pot. So ha'isha hazos b'mahi miskaperes. What is she going to do? How is she going to be atoned? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak tonight based in who hamasapek es akinin who masapek es papsulos ve'es ha'avodos. So Rabbi Yitzchak says no, because it was part of the condition of the person who supplied the birds that Rabbi say whenever there was a psul, It means, let's say, whenever they shechted one of the birds and it turns out the bird was a treif or something, or ovdos, or when something was lost. For example, the case of where the coin of mechza, that's a case of being lost. In all of those cases, the person who had the contract for the birds would undertake replacement of all these kinds of items. That's how he answered that Gemara over there. So the Gemara said, in that case of mechza, as much as the money is going to go into the ola pot, but we are going to go to the bird supplier and ask him for another pair of chatas birds to offer them up just in case. Just in case. So we'll say, since that's how the Gemara paskins, that at the end of the day, in these kind of cases where something happened to one of the bird offerings, either it was lost or it was puzzle, the person who had the bird contract was responsible for all replacements. Hadron Allah, Mos Shenimtsu. Mishnah. Kol harokin hanimtsan b'Yerushalayim tehorin. I will say, in general, if you find saliva, so I'll say, understand that these halachos sound a little bit strange to us, because we're not careful with the laws of ritual purity of tum and tara. But obviously, in days and days of tum and tara, a person has to be vigilant of everything. So what happens? So a person goes ahead and finds saliva, or a person comes in contact with saliva. So the Gemara says that any saliva found in Yerushalayim is considered to be tar. Chutz mishal shuk ha'elyon, Rabbi Meir, with the exception of saliva found in the upper marketplace. So we'll discuss exactly what it is that means. Take a look at Rabbi Silber to Karmana Eda for just a moment. On the left hand side, so we'll say, what's the concern? The concern is there are certain types of tumah that can be conveyed through saliva. Which I will say is just a very interesting idea. That if, let's say, it could be a very interesting idea in terms of transmission of tumah. So if, let's say again, if you have the saliva of a zav, so that can literally convey tumas zivos. See, he says shehein metamet adon kelim mishum da'azlinar basa ruba. So I will say, what the Mishnah is saying is, we make an assumption that the majority of people in Yerushalayim are tahar. Now, why do we make that assumption? Why do we know? Do we say it about Tel Aviv or anywhere else? And the answer is no. Why do we say it about Yerushalayim? Because of proximity to the Beis Midrash. That's what we assume. Majority of people in Yerushalayim are therefore tahorim, and therefore any saliva that's found, we go after the robe, and therefore again tahorim. Right? We'll discuss about the upper marketplace in the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi says, B'shar kol yemos hashana, during the rest of the year. And I will say, we will see during the rest of the year means not during the regalim. That's what it means. During the non-regalim part of the year, if you find saliva in the middle of the road, then tamein, that saliva is tamei. Shebitztadin, if you find saliva on the side of the road, tahorin, then it's tahor. Ubishas haregel, so I'll say, look at the Kavanah Eda again. Shebe'emtza tamein, mishum dezavin dezavos shchichi, umahalchem be'emtza hadrachim, va'tahorim mistalkin litzidi hadrachim. Makom shein drisas haregel matzui umasirin lechol tamish lo yiga bahen. So also listen to this. So apparently the way it used to work says, Rabbi Yossi is the following. During the non-regalim times, so there'd be a lot of people tameim, and in fact it could even be a large number. And the tameim, they could walk wherever they want. So what would they do? They would often walk in the middle of the road, and what would happen? The people who were tahorin, they would go by the sides. They would stay off to the side so as to avoid tumah, and they would tell the tameim people, please stay away from me, because ultimately I'm tahar. So therefore, again, any saliva found in the middle of the road during the regular part of the year is considered to be tamei. On the sides of the road is tahar. Ubishas haregel, but during the regalim, shebe'emtza tahorin. If you find spittle in the middle of the road, if you find saliva in the middle of the road, then what? Then it's tahar. Shebetztadin tamein. But on the sides, why are both saying? Because during the regalim, who's the dominant force? The tahorin. So the tahorin get to walk in the middle of the street, and the tameim, they are relegated to the sides of the road. Mipnei shehamiutin nistalkin litzdadim. Because generally the people in the minority travel by the side of the road. So we'll say again, whereas Rabbi Meir holds that Yerushalayim is always considered to be in a state of rov tara, Rabbi Yossi says not true. The rov tara status is only implied during regalim, or is only assumed during regalim, but during the rest of the year we actually assume a rov tuma. And interesting enough, he actually assumes more of like a geographic reality. Middle of the road will be tamei, side of the road will be tar. Similarly, if you find utensils in Yerushalayim, so we'll say the shaila is what's the status of the kli? Is the kli considered to be tar? Considered to be tar? It's a very interesting explanation. derech yirida lebeis haTziril. Tamein. If you find it on the way down to the mikvah, then it's tamei. Derech aliyah. If you find it on the way up, tahorin. It's tar. Shelo yiridasan aliyasan. Because the way that you went down is not the way that you went up. Rabbi Meir. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. So we'll say Rabbi Meir says that the mikvahs were constructed that you did not go in and out the same way. We'll say it's actually interesting. If you ever go in Eretz Yisrael by the southern wall excavations, by the Kotel, so they actually unearthed a whole number of these mikvahs. And what's amazing they found with all these mikvahs is there are two sets of stairs. There are two sets of stairs. There's one in and there's one out. Also because remember, it's not like mikvah like today. This was like assembly line mikvahs, right? You took off your clothes, you went in, you went out, you came out the other side, and boom. Because remember, just think about sheer volume, sheer number of people that had to go to the mikvah prior to coming into the Beis Hamikdash. So it's like, so therefore the Gemara is saying, if you find it on the way down, then you assume that it's tamei because it's being taken down to the mikvah. Coming up, you assume that it's already tahar. Rabbi Yossi says, kulan tahar. No, we assume that all kelim in Yerushalayim are all tahorim. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at the Karban HaEdah, he says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer kulan tahorim de lo gazru al safek kelim Yerushalayim. Because Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that in Yerushalayim they were not gozer on safek kelim. That all safek kelim Yerushalayim are tahorim. All right, we'll see why that is. Chutz, with a couple of exceptions. Min hasal, a sal is a basket. Magrefa is a shovel. And maritza is a hammer. Hamiyuchadin likvaros. Why are they both saying? Because these were all utensils that were set aside, that were specifically used for either grave transfers, like moving bones from one place to another. That's the basket, or for actually digging graves, like a shovel and hammer. We'll see the shovel was used to move dirt. The hammer was used to break apart rock. So according to Rabbi Yossi says these kelim, if you find them, we assume they're tamei because we assume that they're used for the creation of graves. Right, Rabbi says he's going to take us back to our Pesachim days. Sakin shenimtseis b'yodalid. Remember this? So right, let's say you find a knife on the 14th of Nisan. So the shaila is now, what's the status of the knife? So the Gemara says, shochet b'miyad. You could shecht with it immediately. Why? Because since it's Erev Pesach, and we assume that what? That people made sure that their knives are in a state of ritual purity. Okay? But if you find it on the 13th, you have to tovel it again before using it. Why? Rabbi say because the 13th we assume people don't yet have their kelim in a state of ritual purity. Kofitz, Rabbi say kofitz is like a cleaver, right? Or I guess that's the right word for it. A cleaver. So also remember, a kofitz would not be used for Karban Pesach. Why? Because remember, kofitz was used to break apart bones. You can't break apart bones in the Karban Pesach, but kofitz could have been used for the Karban Chagiga. For the Shlamim. So the Gemara says, what happens if you find the kofitz? Whether you find the kofitz on the 13th or the 14th, you would have to tovel it again before using it, because again, there's no reason to assume that people would have prepared their kofitz for use, because you can't use kofitz at Pesach. What happens if the 14th falls out on Shabbos? Then Rabbi say, and now you find the knife. Shochet ba miyad. So we'll say, listen to this. Now, there's an interesting discussion as to what this is talking about. So the Karban HaEdah suggests that again, this is talking about the kofitz, right? That if you find the kofitz on the 14th, which is Shabbos, you can go ahead and use it for shechita immediately, because again, you could assume that even though again, I will say you're not going to be shechting anything with the kofitz on Shabbos, because remember, the only thing you can do on Shabbos is the Karban Pesach itself. But it's talking about the Shlamim as well. So if you look at the last two lines of the Karban HaEdah, he says, "V'yesh mefarshim shochet b'miyad b'kofitz ka'amar." The afagav de'in chagiga b'Shabbos mikol makom chazaka shit biluha me'erev Shabbos sor chagigas yudalid. Supposed to say, the Gemara is suggesting over here that lemaisa, when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, we also assume that people took care of their kofitz before Shabbos as well. Amud Beis, b'tesvav shochet ba miyad. Look at the Karban HaEdah again, and on the 15th you could check with it immediately. But also, this is referring to over here the fishakala am yodin shaza utvila asur b'yom tov. So we'll say if you find these items on the 15th already is Yom Tov. Remember, you could shecht on Yom Tov. So if you find it on Yom Tov, we assume that everything is going to be tar by Yom Tov, because remember, you can't go ahead and purify things on Yom Tov. Okay? Nimtzeis kshur l'sakin. What happens if you find the kofitz tied to a knife? We'll say this is all we have. This all in Pesachim. Let's say you find the kofitz tied to the knife. Harihu kisakin. The kofitz then has the same status as knife, meaning since they're tied together, we assume that they were treated the same way. Rabbi Adin b'shem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. So listen to this. Remember, let's go back for just a moment. Remember again, the first case in the Mishnah was that in general, if you find saliva in Yerushalayim, the Rabbi Meir said that l'maisa, everything is considered to be tahor, with the exception of any kind of saliva found in the upper shuk. So what was special about the upper shuk? So the Gemara says, Katzron shal nochrim hayasham. There was literally a Gentile launderer who used to live up there. Now, both I remember, there's a general rabbinic prohibition that the saliva of nochrim has the status of the saliva of a zav. Saliva of a zav. Now, both say that was done for a variety of reasons, most notably in order to maintain certain distances between Jew and Gentile. So therefore the Gemara says that's why the Gemara singles out this upper marketplace, because the Moishe there was a non-Jewish launderer there. Take a look at the Karban Eidah for just a moment. Katzron shel nachrim, kolbe shel nachrim hayasham b'shuka elyon, v'chachamim gazru ala nachrim shu kizavim l'chol divreim, v'roko tameh. So that's why again any saliva found in the upper marketplace, one has to be concerned that it belonged to these Gentile launderers, and therefore again it would be tameh. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Chanina. I'm sorry?
Were they the majority, though?
They must have been the majority up there. They must have been the majority up there.
If not, you'd be cool.
Yeah, in the Shukah Elyon, must have been the majority. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Arudos hayu nochrim b'Yushalayim. They said there were what? There were, remember, this is one specific marketplace. This is not saying upper Yush. This is one specific marketplace where they must have been the majority of people. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Arudos hayu nochrim b'Yushalayim. They used to what this literally means is they used to spear wild donkeys in Yerushalayim. Now, Rabbi said, why are they spearing wild donkeys? Take a look at the Karban Eidah again. Arudi hayar, wild donkeys. Hayunochrin l'tzorech arios shal melech. So I'll say what they used to do is, I guess you feed wild donkeys to lions. So what they used to do is they used to slaughter these wild donkeys in Yerushalayim to feed them to the king's lions. So what happened? So Mar says, as a result, V'hayu ole regalim mishtakin b'dam ad arkavo sehen. So say apparently there were times when they were slaughtering a lot of these donkeys, and the Jewish people who were there, the ole regalim, would be walking up to their knees in blood. Right? They were slaughtering so many. Now this could be a little bit of hyperbole. What it's saying over here is that l'maisa, everybody was getting smeared with this blood. They were slaughtering these animals all over the place. So the Oli Regalim, who are obviously there for the regal, to offer up their karbanos, were coming in contact with this wild donkey blood. So the Gemara says, so now the Shiloh was what Rabbi saying. The Shiloh was, what impact, if any, does this have on their state of personal tumantara? They came before the Chachamim, and the rabbis didn't say anything to them. The Rabbi said the fact that the rabbis didn't say anything to them indicates that what? That apparently coming in contact with this wild donkey blood did not pose a problem. So the Gemara is going to say, why is that? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you. Rabbi Simon b'Shim Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Maisa b'Pirda Mishal Beis Rebbe. There was an episode with the mule from the home of Rebbe, Shemesa, who died, V'tiharu es dameha mishum nevela. And they said that its blood was not problematic because of nevela. And I will say, what does this mean? Now remember, we actually had this a little bit earlier, but we know that lemaisa, a nevela carcass, has the ability to transmit tumah. The shaila is, what about the blood of a nevela? Is the blood of nevela, remember we had this sugya earlier, is the blood of nevela like nevela itself? So the Gemara suggests the answer to that is no. And that's why, again, when the pilgrims were coming up, right, when the Oli Regal were coming up, and they're up to their knees in wild donkey blood, the rabbis didn't say anything. Why? Because Lemaisa, the blood of a nevela does not transmit tumah. So when the donkey, when the mule of Rebbe's house dies, they ruled the blood does not transmit any level of tumah. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Sha'ol Rebbe Simon. So, Rabbi Eliezer, Sha'ol Rabbi Simon. So Rabbi Eliezer asked Rabbi Simon, Ad kama. And I will say, Ad kama means how much blood? So now this is really just a repeat of the thing we had before. So now that we're saying is that blood of a nevela does not transmit nevela tumah. How much blood are we talking? Is it any amount of blood? Is it only blood up to a certain shear that doesn't convey tumah, but more than that would convey tumah? So the Gemara says, Velo agive. And Rabbi Simon didn't pay any attention to Rabbi Eliezer. Okay. Sha'ol Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. He went to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and he asked him, Amalei ad revius tar, Yosemi kan tame. So Rishon Levi said, no, it's the dispensation is only up to a revius of blood, but more than a revius of blood would in fact convey tuma. Because also remember we had the shita before that up to a revius, up there once you get to a revius, the revius of blood is like what is like the gizayis of an avela. Okay, uba'ash l'Rabbi Lezer telo chazer le Rabbi Simon Shmuasa, and Rabbi Eliezer was very upset, was very offended that Rabbi Simon didn't answer him. Right? I mean, I asked you a question. All right, you want to tell me it's a stupid question? You want to tell me, acknowledge the fact that I asked you a question. I'll say also something very interesting, which is, as you've seen already, Yerushalmi has like a lot more of this emotion in the interchanges than Bavli does. They're Israeli. You know what I'm saying? They're Israeli. So, it's very interesting to see because we've seen already this type of dynamic where people asked each other questions and this one didn't answer that one and this one got all offended. You don't really see that. They don't really see that in the Bavli. It's just very interesting. So what happens? So Rabbi Lezer, who's Rabbi Eliezer, gets very upset that Rabbi Simon didn't answer him. Rav Bivi Hava Yosef Masni Hadein Uvda. So Rabbi Bivi was sitting, and he was going over he was talking about this particular case. I will say this case of the mule of Rabbi that died, and they weren't Matami the blood. Amali Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna, Ad Kama. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna said, until how much? Meaning how much blood doesn't convey to him. Amarle, Ad Revius Tahar Yosemi Kantam. And he said, maybe, could it be that until a Revius is Tahar, but more than that is Tameh? Uba'at Bey. Rabbi say again, Ba'at Bey means, again, Rav Bibi didn't respond. So you have Rav Yitzchak bar Bisna asking this question, and Rav Bibi doesn't respond. Amarle Rabbi Zreika, begin Dahava Sha'alacha at Ba'at Bey. So Rabbi Zreika says to Rabbi Bibi, what's the problem? Right here, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna asked you, Rabbi Bibi, a question. And why won't you answer him? Amrali begin. So what does Rav Bibi answer? So again, just to get the name straight, Rav Bibi is sitting relating this teaching. Rabbi Yitzchak asks him on the teaching. I understand blood does not convey nevela tuma. How much blood? How much blood? And what happens? And Rav Bibi doesn't answer. Rav Zrika then says to Rav Bibi, essentially, what's your problem? Why aren't you answering Rav Yitzchak bar Bisna? So what does Rav Bibi answer? Amrali. Begin delo havas datai bi. I'm not ignoring him. I'm just really not able to concentrate. Why am I not able to concentrate? Well, it's a very profound Gemara. We've had this before. The Amar Rab Chanin v'hayu chayecha tuluyim mineged. So what does the Torah say? We'll say this is about the tochacha. So the Torah says literally, you will have your life will be suspended in front of you. Now, what does it mean? Your life will be suspended in front of you. Zeh shulokeach chitin l'shana. What does this refer to? This refers to someone who does not grow his own grain, and he purchases grain from a merchant, and he purchases enough for a year. So I'll say, you see, it's very different for us to think about this because we think about it as buying food for a year. Mamish, who does? So you have to understand something that in the agricultural society, you often bought staples for a long time. But what's the issue? The issue is it's very nice that you're settled for a year, but what? You don't know what's going to happen afterwards. Right? What's going to happen after the year? So it's very nice now I've secured for myself produce now. But remember, we'll say that was the chap of land. When you had land was your security. You knew that you'd be able to hopefully produce something. If you are dependent on others for your produce, even though you're getting a year's worth of wheat right now, literally, it's a very profound statement. It's like your life is suspended. You have no surety. You have no security. Lilah. Now also remember, the pasuk goes in a progression. You will be scared night and day. What is that? This refers to someone who buys his wheat from a merchant. So we'll say when you buy wheat from a merchant, you buy it in much smaller quantities. The notion of constantly buying your food as needed was even a more fundamental lack of security. And you will not even believe in your life. Now, what does mean you'll not believe in your life? Meaning you won't believe that you'll be able to make it through the day. That refers to someone who has to buy his daily bread from the baker. So we'll say you see the progression. First, you begin with someone who, again, is only able to secure a year of sustenance. So that already makes me unsure. The next level of intensity is I buy in small quantities. And the greatest level of intensity, which leads to the greatest lack of security in life, is someone who literally has to buy his daily bread from the baker. So the Gemara says, Va'ana samach apaltira. And Rabbi said, I rely on the baker. So I'll say it's very profound because also what it's saying is, and we know this to be very true, is that when a person struggles with parnasa, it impacts every aspect of their life. It's not just the pshat that, I'm not making enough money or I'm struggling, but everything else is fine. Everything else may be fine, Baruch Hashem. I have a wonderful family, I might have my health, I might have all those things, but the lack of financial security colors the way a person sees the world. So look how profound this is. So Rabbi says, you have to understand, I am not ignoring Rav Yitzchak Bisna. I'm not ignoring him. But you have to understand, so that even though I'm here in the Beis Midrash, my mind is very preoccupied. I'm a very nervous, I'm very distracted, because at the end of the day, my parnasa is not secure. Very profound. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, my kidon, Heyed Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesura. So we'll say, so now what's the halacha? Here's what we've established. We've established that Lamaisa again. That it seems to be that the blood of an avela does not transmit tumah. The only variable is what? How much? So the Gemara says, "My kidon." So what's the resolution? Hey, Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesora al dam nevelos shehu tar. So Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesora said that dam nevelos is tar, totally tar. Okay. So the Gemara says, take a look. Okay, don't take a look yet. Fine. So dam nevelos shehu tar. Ma'utar tar melahachshir. So what does it mean that it's tar? Maybe tar means we'll say that it can't go ahead and make something else hukshul tumah. We know that in order for an item to be makabel tumah, the object itself has to first come in contact with a liquid. Not every liquid is machshir an item for tumah. Maybe what it means when we say that the blood of nevela is tar, that it can't make something else hukshul tumah. Ha litamos mitame, but maybe it does in fact go ahead and make something else tameh. Taman tanin, and we learn later on, dam hasheretz mitame kibsaro. We learned later on that the blood of a sheretz, in fact, is able to make something tameh, just like the flesh of a sheretz makes something tameh. So the Gemara says, mitame ve'eno machshir. We see from here that what? It's able to convey tumah, but it cannot be machshir something to be makabel tumah. Ve'en lanu kiyotzebo. And we have nothing else like this. Now I will say, when the Gemara says we have nothing else like this, what does that make it sound like? It makes it sound like it's only the blood of a sheretz that has the ability to convey tumah, but the blood of other things does not have the ability to convey tumah. So Gemara says, no. The inlanu kiyotzebo kishir tumaso. Aval damo mitame kibsaro. We'll say, no. What it means is there's nothing else like sheretz, where even a very small amount of blood can convey tumah. Just like we'll say, even if a sheretz itself is very small, the flesh of the sheretz conveys tumah, even if the sheretz is very small. So too, the blood of a sheretz also conveys tumah in very small quantity. But lemaisa, the fact that other items, their blood does convey tumah like their flesh as well. Am Rav Yossi, pligi ba tre amuraim. We have machlokes amuram. Chad amar tamei, v'chad amar tar. One said that the blood of an avela is tamei, and one said that it is tar. To which the Gemara says, man da amar taik Rabbi Huda. The one who says that it's tamei is like Rabbi Huda. Or man da amar taik Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesora. And the one who says that it's like Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesora. Amrli Rav Avduma demin nuchusa v'yaos de Rabbi Yehuda moraina de beinesia hava. And this is true because Rabbi Yehuda was the posek. Rabbi Yehuda was the posek of the house of the Nasi. So we'll say what comes out according to this, you should just know, is that dam nevela. Still, we're left with this machlokes as to whether or not dam nevela actually conveys tumah or not. And if it can, and if you do say it conveys tumah, then the shaila is in what shear. In what shear? Is it only from a revius and above, or is it even in the amount of a small amount, like the sheretz? That's the fundamental machlokes. We'll see. You should just know that Lamas, you could see over here already. You could see over here. You can see over here that Lamaisa, that dam nevelos is actually, that's where the Rambam Paskin is, that dam nevelos is tahor up until the amount of a revius. Once it gets to the amount of a revius, then aloch lemaisa, a revius of dam has the status of a kizayis of basar, and therefore will ultimately convey tumah. So says the Gemara, lo kain amar Rabbi Avol b'shem Rabbi, kala rokin, all of the different salivas. Lo kain amar Rabbi Avol b'shem Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, lo gazra ala rokin shibushalayim. Ha itmar alei Rabbi Avin b'shem Rabbi Shimon Levi katzrin shal nachrim hayasham. So we'll say again, the Gemara is just saying over here that although the Mishnah began with the statement that all of the saliva in Yerushalayim is considered to be tahar, so the Gemara just points out over here that with the exception of Rabbi Shimon Levi said that there was the marketplace, like we said before. up the upper marketplace where there was the Gentile launderer. So the Gemara says, B'shayimos hashana hatmein mahalchin siboles or shiboles v'atahorin mahalchin min atzad. Both say during the rest of the year, so the Tmein would walk in the shiboles means in the middle of the street, and the Tahorin would walk on the side. V'atahorin mahalchin stam v'atmein omer lahem peroshu. And what happens? And the Tahorin would walk regularly, and what would happen? And the Tmein would say, move aside. So we'll say again, what it's saying is during the regular part of the year, the Tmein were the majority. Therefore, they walked in the middle of the road, and they were also the ones who told the Tahorin, "You guys get out of the way if you don't want to become Tamei." B'shas haregel, in times of the regel, hatahorin. This is what we just read in the Mishnah. Hatahorin mahalchim shiboles. The Tahorin walked in the middle of the street. V'atmein mahalchin min atzad, and the Tmein walked on the side. V'atmein mahalchin stam, and the Tmein walked normally. V'atahorin omer lehem peroshu, and the Tahorin are the ones who told them move out of the way. So also all the Gemara is reflecting over here is that essentially the dominant group always got to walk in the middle of the street, and there was a dominant group that would shoo away the other minority group. Thank you. So the Gemara says the following: So most again, if you remember the man, the Mishnah said that machlokes actually in the Mishnah, actually not a machlokes. The Rabbi Yossi said that when you find kalim in your, actually was a machlokes. If you find kalim in Yerushalayim, what's the status of them? So Rabbi Meir wanted to suggest if you find them going down to the mikvah, they're tamei. You find them coming up from the mikvah, they're tahar. Rabbi Yossi said in general kalim are tahorim, with the exception of kalim that are used for digging graves. So the Gemara says lo kain am Rabbi Avo b'shem Rabbi Yochanan lo gazru ala kalim shibushalayim mikevan shenimtzu derech yerida lebeis hatvila na'asu hochiach. So Rabbi Avo says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that with kalim when it comes to Yerushalayim, if they were found on the way down to the mikvah, na'asu hochiach. Na'asu hochiach means that's absolute proof that they are tmein. So we'll say again, what the Gemara is saying over here is that lemaisa, you can go ahead and accept the view. You can accept the view that all the kalim in Yerushalayim are considered to be tar, but you can also accept the view that what? That kalim found on the way down to the mikvah are going to be tmeim. And that's not a contradiction in terms. Why is it, Abosai? Because lemaisa, if you find them on the way down to the mikvah, that's a pretty good that's what he calls hochiach. That is pretty good circumstantial evidence that lemaisa, this would meaning I can hold up the klal that kalim in general are considered to be torn in Yerushalayim, but I could still also hold that kalim found on the way down to the mikvah will still be considered tmeim. Abishol hayakorin osat tziporin. So we'll say the Gemara just talking about over here that this what the Mishnah called this meritza, this hammer. So different people called it different names. Abba Shal used to call it a tziporin. Well, say tziporin literally means like a nail, because apparently again it used to be like shaped like a long fingernail and able to dig up the earth. Man damar tziporin, shedom le tziporin. So the man damar who called it a tziporin because he said that the hammer itself resembled a nail. Man damar meritza. Others called it a meritza. Then I will say meritza literally means like a crusher. A hammer or a crusher. Why? Shemeritza ha'evan lebeis hakvaros, because you would use it to crush the stone in order to clear way for a grave. Kofitz. I will say, if you remember again, so the Mishnah spoke about this idea of the cleaver, and actually the last case in the Mishnah was that if you find the cleaver tied to a knife, then the cleaver has the same status of the knife. So the Gemara just points out over here, Tani hasakin kashurala harihi kimos harizu kamosa. Just the Gemara point is there's another Mishnah, and the other Mishnah reads the opposite way, that if you have a knife tied to the cleaver, then what? Then the knife has the status of the cleaver. So the Mishnah wanted to say that in our Mishnah said the cleaver has the status of the knife. Another Mishnah says that the knife has the status of the cleaver. Okay, two different Mishnayos. Says the Mishnah. We'll say another fascinating case. Paroches shenitma b'vlat hatuma. We'll say paroches is the curtain that hung in the Beis Hamikdash. If you remember again, there are multiple curtains, but the simplest one to visualize is the curtain between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Right? Remember, there was a curtain that separated the Kodesh from the... So let's say that curtain, Shenitma bevlad hatuma, that became Tama with a Vlad hatuma. I will say, what's Vlad hatuma? Vlad hatuma is rabbinic tuma. It literally means the offspring of tuma. It's rabbinic tuma. And I will say, what's an example of rabbinic tuma? If you take a look at the Karban Ha'ida, he says, Shenaga b'mashkin tmeim. Shechacham gazal amash shematami. So we'll say, for example, let's say again, you have liquid that came in contact with the sheretz. with the sheretz. So midoraisa, the sheretz does not convey tumah to mashkin, but midrabanan it does. That's because, as the Karman Eda points out, there is one case of tumas mashkin, which is where a zav or a zava touches a mashke. In that case, the liquid does become tummy, just like the zav and zava. So, in order to safeguard that principle, Chazal, where goes there, general rabbinic tumah on any liquid that comes in contact with something tummy. So now, let's say again, the sheretz touches a liquid. The liquid touches the parochas. The liquid touches the parochas. Now, the parochas is tummy with rabbinic tumah. So, what do you do with it? This is amazing. So, the Gemara says, "Makbilin osa bifnim." So we go ahead and you have to now immerse the parochas. So we take down the parochas. We'll see in Yuma, by the way, how exactly they did this process. We took down the parochas and what? We immersed it in the mikvah. Now, there was a mikvah right inside of the Beis Hamikdash, in what was called the parva chamber. We'll see that in Yuma also. So they immersed it right in the mikvah inside the Beis Hamikdash. Umachnisin osamiyad. And immediately after immersing it, what do? We hang it right back up. Because we also remember, although under normal circumstances, when an item becomes tummy, a person becomes tummy, and you go to the mikvah, you have to wait until Herav Shemesh. You have to wait until that evening to become tahar, That doesn't apply in this case of rabbinic tumah by the Beis Hamikdash. So we immerse it, hang it right back up. What happens, however, if the parochas becomes tamei with an avatuma? Let's say the parochas literally becomes somebody dies, and they're holding on to the parochas. So what happens in a case like that? We take it down and we take it outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Also, what this means into the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. And we tovel it there. Bless you. We spread it out in the chel. Now I will say the chel is the area right outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Remember again, we had a couple of days ago this thing called the sarug. The sarug was this fence that surrounded it. So outside of the Beis Hamikdash, there was like another courtyard. There was a courtyard in the Beis Hamikdash complex that's inside. And then when you actually exited the temple compound, there was another courtyard area. So they would hang out. They would hang or spread out the parochas in that area. In this case, because the parochas became exposed to an avatzoma, it did not become tahor until that night. So they spread it out there in order to leave it outside of the Beis until nightfall. If it was a new parochas that nobody had ever seen before, shotchin osa al gag ha'itzdava kedei sheira ha'amas malachta shina. What would they do? If it was a new parochas that nobody had ever seen before, then what would they do? They would spread it out on top of the itzdava. Also, if you remember again, we had our itzdava cases in Erevin. They used to have like rows of benches, roofed benches, in the area around the Beis Hamikdash. So if it was a new parochas that nobody ever saw before, they spread it out on top of these roofs, these roofed benches, and people will be able to see it from all around Yerushalayim, in order that people should see the beautiful handiwork of the parochas. Reb Shimon Gamliel Mishum, Reb Shimon Askan, parochas ovia tefach al shivim ushtayim nimim ne'ereges. The thickness of the parochas was a tefach, and it had to be made on 72 different looms. That's how large, 72 different looms. Watch this. Every strand of material for the parochas was made of 24 smaller strands. Arka mem ama, its length was 40 amos. V'rachba chaf, and its width was 20 amos. Omishmonim ushtayim rivo haisanasis. And you know how much the cost to make the parochas was? 820,000 gold pieces. That's how much it actually cost to make. Also, what that means is that's between materials and labor. That was the amount of money it took to produce the parochas. And watch this. Ushtayim osim b'chol shana. And I will say they would make 2 new curtains each year. So just imagine the massive amount of wealth that there was, obviously, in the Beis Hamikdash as well. So they made 2 new curtains each year. Ushlosh me'os kohanim at bilanos. And I will say when they had to immerse the parochas, it was so heavy and so big that what? They needed 300 kohanim to participate, first of all, in the removal, in the immersion and the removal from the mikvah and the spreading out of the parochas. Amazing. Yeah, I guess it was enough. Well, 300 is a lot of people. So the Gemara says the following. Ilu amar chut echad kaful. So now the Gemara goes through, how do we know that each of the strings was made up of 24 different strings? Ilu amar chut. So we would just use the word chut. Chut would mean 1. Kaful shtaim would mean 2. Shazor, which means twisted, would mean 3. Mashazar means 6. So also now that we have mashazar, and then what? Arba Remember, there are 4 types of different fiber, right? There's tcheles, there's argamon, tolaas, shani, in each meaning of each thread. So the Gemara says, therefore we see mikan, so excuse me, arba mikan, ha esrin va'arba. So we'll say that's ultimately where we get 24. So you have your 4 different items, again twisted in 6 different ways. That gives us 24 different threads per strand. Tani shlosh mushtaim. Others say no. In fact, there are 32 different strands within each thread of the. This is for the parochas, for the curtain. Ilu amar chut. If it would have just said chut is just 1. Kafel shnaim shazur la'arba mashazar l'shmona. Arba mikan, and Rabbi say everybody's agreeing you have 4 different types of materials that are being woven into this. Hot, Lasson, and train, that gives me 32. Tana, so Rabbi say all this just machlokes of how many individual, I'm using the word strands, if that's the right word, how many individual strands were in each thread of the parochas. Others say arba mishmon, others say it was 48. Ilu amar chot, if it would have just said chot echot, kafel shnaim, kelia, Lishlosha, Shazur Lishisha, Mashizar Lishneim Asar, Arba'a Mikan. We know that there are 4 different types of thread. What do you get from here? Mikan, Ha Arba'im Vitimnia. Fine. Kasav Echad Omer Ma'aserokim. The Kasav Echad Omer Ma'asechoshev. Now, both say, interestingly enough, the Torah uses 2 different phrases. Torah calls it a ma'aser rokim. Rabbi Sayan will see rokim literally means embroiderer versus choshev, which means a designer. Rabbi say if you take a look at the Kabbana Ida for just a moment, he says ma'aser rokim gabe masach hapesach ksiv the gabe parochas ksiv ma'aser choshev. So Rabbi say by the curtain, by the entranceway to the Beis Hamikdash, the Torah calls it a ma'aser rokim. Torah calls it the work of an embroiderer, but yet by the curtain of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it calls it a ma'aser choshev, the work of a designer. What's the difference between the work of a designer and the work of an embroiderer? So listen to this, Rabbi saying ma'aser rokim pirtzuf echad. The work of an embroiderer, so he's able to make an image on one side. Ma'aseh choshev, but a designer, shtei pirtzufos. Could what Rabbi say? Make 2 designs, the same design on both sides. Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Nechemia, Chad Amar Ma'aseh Rokim Arimi Kan VaArimi Kam. One said that an embroiderer is able to make, let's say, we'll say they were lions. So an embroiderer is able to make a lion on both sides. Because obviously you can imagine normally when you sew something, so what ends up happening? You make the image on one side, but on the other side again you don't have that image. Either you have the threads coming out, or you have again a disheveled image. But again, Ma'aseh Rokim means you're able to make the image on both sides. Ma'aseh Choshev Arimi Kan VeChalak Mikan. So both say again the embroiderer was so skilled that he was able to make the same image on both sides. The choshev was even more skilled at what? That on one side there could be an image and what? And on the other side, nothing, totally blank. On the other hand, the Gemara says, Ma'aseh choshev mikan v'chalak mikan. The Charna Chamer said, Ma'aseh rokim, what's an embroiderer? Ari mikan v'chalak mikan. No, the embroiderer is the one who can make it. An image on one side and blank on the other. The Ma'aseh choshev, Arimi Kan, the Neshami Kan. And I will say, what was the Ma'aseh Choshev? What was the incredible work of the designer? He was able to make 2 different images. And I will say, that's how he paskin, by the way. The Rambam says in the halachos of the Beis Hamikdash that the way the curtain was arranged in the Kodesh HaKadoshim was that there were different images on both sides. And I will say, so you'll say to yourself, well, that's easy. Because what do? They took 2 different tapestries and put it together. No. This was one act of weaving, one act of sewing. And amazingly enough, they were able to create 2 distinct images on both sides. Again, on one side there was a lion, on the other side there was an eagle. B'shmonim u'shtayim rivo haisanasis. So remember again, what did the Gemara say? The Mishnah said that the parochas itself cost 820,000 gold pieces. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Biznam b'shem Rabbi Shmuel Guzma. That's an exaggeration. It didn't cost. What it's saying is it was very, very, very expensive. So the Gemara says Taman Taninan Pamim Haya Aleha Kishlosh Me'os Kur. So the Gemara gives another example of other hyperbole. So the Gemara says, for example, we learned elsewhere that sometimes there was up to 300 core of ash on the top of the Beis Hamikdash. On the Mizbeach. So the Gemara says there was never 300 core of ash is an incredible amount of ash. There was never 300 core of ash on the top of the Beis Hamikdash, on the top of the Mizbeach. Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Bon b'shem Rabbi Shmuel Guzma. So the Gemara is just pointing out that there are sometimes that the Gemara employs a little bit of hyperbole to make the point. So the parochas literally cost 820,000 gold pieces. No. Was it very expensive? Absolutely yes. All right, so we're going to stop over here. I'm going to change around. We're going to do shir tomorrow morning. We'll say again, Daf Yomi tomorrow morning is at 7:45. We're going to do the Daf Yomi again before the Chumash, so 7:45 tomorrow, followed by the Chumash Miras Hashem at 8:25, and obviously we'll do the last piece of the Gemara Miras Hashem by the Siyum by Shalosh Shudas.